Welcome back to the 384th episode of Thought Behind Things. Today is the 22nd of November 2023 and आज हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं Aleena Nadeem, who is the founder of EduFi, one of the startups that was recently announced to have raised funding. इनकी startup को $6 million की funding हुई है. It is part of the 5 startups that फैसल आफ्ताब जो अभी recently आए थे उन्होंने अनाउंस किया था कि जी इनकी फंडिंग वो कर रहे हैं. उन 5 स्टार्टअप्स में bookme.pk ऑलरेडी TBT पे आ चुके हैं. नंबर 2 के ऊपर this was what I found the most exciting because they're working in education and they're working in FinTech, and this is an area that I'm not only personally passionate about but also one of the area जो कि मुझे लगता है कि अगर स्टार्टअप स्पेस में पाकिस्तानी पोटेंशियल है तो वो इस एरिया में था. We had Aleena over and we talked about the model, why she believes that this will work, the potential impact, ऑलरेडी स्केल क्या है और आने वाले वक्त में वो किधर देख रही हैं. इनकी जर्नी भी हमने देखी. शी इज़ ग्रेजुएटेड फ्रॉम MIT, वर्कड एट गोल्डमैन सैक्स. इट्स अ सॉलिड प्रोफाइल, फिनोमिनल एक्सपीरियंस. इफ़ यू रियली वांट टू अंडरस्टैंड कि पाकिस्तान में स्टार्टअप्स कौन सी काम कर रही हैं, कौन सी एक्साइटिंग हैं, कौन सी ऐसी हैं जिनको अगर फंडिंग हुई है तो VCs ने कुछ सोच के ही फंडिंग की होगी. you'll be able to get a lot of insight from this conversation. अगर आप चैनल पे नए हैं तो हमें सब्सक्राइब करना मत भूलिएगा. अगर आप चैनल पे पुराने हैं तो do like the video. It really helps with the algorithm. If you have any thoughts, let me know in the comment section below. It really helps me improve the quality of the conversation. Overseas Pakistanis can help support the channel with the Stripe link down below. It helps us remain independent for as long as possible. But anyways, here is Aleena Nadeem on TBT Go, Lahore studio. Aleena, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to start the conversation just trying to understand a little bit about where were you born and early life aapne kahan pe guzari.
Sure. So as you mentioned, my name is Aleena. I grew up in Saudi, Riyadh, a very different Riyadh from what it is now.
End to end? Like you were born in Riyadh as well?
No, we probably don't want to go into the story of where I was born because it's a bit of a circle. But I was born in New York, lived in London, but all of my middle school and then moved to Saudi. So middle school and high school, all that I remember is from Saudi, Riyadh.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. How was that? How was Riyadh at the time?
I loved it. People ask me, you lived in Riyadh, you go to school on a camel. And I was like, what? I don't go to school on a camel. I loved it, right? I think ignorance is bliss. And when you're a child, you don't really know of your life outside a compound. I grew up in a compound,
right,
which you might know. It's just a gated community. I had everything that I needed there. But now that I do think about it, wearing an abaya and going outside the compound and, outside the compound is a very conservative society. And now that I've gotten more exposed and gone to college in the US and, read a little and realized that, maybe I was living in a very conservative society and the compound life is not necessarily how everyone's grown up.
Right. But within the compound, it was different, but even back in those days.
Yeah, I lived in a British compound. So there's some compounds which are, where the majority is foreigners. And so I lived in one of those. And so it was still a very westernized, like that ground or that land is Western land. So technically, and so it's quite liberal there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you did your high school from Riyadh as well?
Yes. I went to a small school, British International School of Riyadh.
Right. Had you lived in Pakistan?
I have never lived in Pakistan. Okay. So I am an overseas Pakistani. I only moved to Pakistan for the first time in my life in October 2021 to start EduFi.
Right.
And yes.
Okay, before going there.
Yeah.
So you graduated, I would say, in 2012?
Yeah.
And where did you go for your university?
I went to MIT, yeah.
Doing what?
I did my undergrad there in business and finance and graduated in 2016.
Tell me about your, why did you choose MIT? What was the thought process there? Why did you pursue business in the first place? And MIT mein generally, when you think MIT, you think engineering, right? You think tech or any form of engineering, to be very honest. Business is generally not the first thing that comes to your mind. So tell me about the thought process. While you were in high school applying to colleges, what were you looking at?
Sure. I also did a lot of courses in mathematics. So I have a minor in maths.
Right.
But I felt that the Sloan Business School was really intriguing to me at that time. I think people also forget that when you're a kid, I mean, younger, I mean, you go to college at what, 19, 20, 21, you don't really know what you want to do with your life. You go with what interests you, right? I felt I got introduced to this professor called John Cox. He created the, Shoals model. He was a great professor, and I loved the way that he taught. And so he introduced me to more Sloan courses, and I think that's where I kind of ended up being pulled into there. But was it an active decision? Probably not. I just kind of got
was like MIT a dream, or was it just something that just an interesting coincidence that happened?
No, definitely a dream. I remember I put on a poster. This is like Manifestation 101. I put up a poster on my bedroom wall in Saudi and was like, this is where I want to go, because I've always been fascinated with technology as well, and that like MIT is like the school for technology, right?
I mean, having gone to MIT, what can you identify from within yourself? Because जो नहीं गया मैं नहीं गया, right? आपको दिमाग में आता है कि यार MIT तो is just this exclusive club जिधर घुसने के लिए खुदा ही जानता है क्या चाहिए होगा. So were you like a genius student with distinctions across the board? Was it incredible co-curricular activities? Or was it you really knowing what you wanted to do and then pursuing a path to make it happen? What made it happen, rather, if I were to ask you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you need the grades, right? Like I have 13 A stars, 4 A stars in A levels, distinctions in economics. I think, economics record is still on the books.
Solid,
Yeah, I mean, I had 800 out of 800 in the SATs, but I just think that these scores don't really mean anything, right? I think for me, actually, I think in Pakistan, it's become a little bit of like a status symbol, कि आप कौन से college पे गए हो. But what I find really frustrating is, and I often see this more in females, is that you see amazingly talented females, super smart females they've gotten into this amazing college, and then I ask them, what are you doing with your life and they might not have pursued something that they were really passionate about. So I think what matters more is, okay, you've gotten into a great college, it's great, but what you do after, what do you do with that degree, right? If I just am putting the degree on my wall and not making use of that, then I've taken a seat from somebody who is maybe more deserving than me, who could have done more with that degree. So I think that's the more important part. But obviously getting into a good college also, and if you don't get into a great college with like the MITs or the Harvards or the Yales of the world,
it's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world, right? Like if you look at some of the leading businessmen today, some of them haven't even gone to college, right?
Yeah,
so
of course.
I think it's about, I think also my time at MIT, I noticed that there was, and this is just might be my controversial opinion. Maybe we might need to cut this out. But I think that there is like an inverse relationship between EQ and IQ.
Okay.
Right? So, sorry, just bear with me for 1 second. Some of my friends in MIT, they're genuinely geniuses, right? Like they're way smarter than me, right? And they've gone on to do PhD in nuclear engineering, working at SpaceX now in the Valley, doing, crazy things. But there's a certain level of EQ that you need to really kind of push things on the ground in the real world.
Right.
And I feel like sometimes some of my MIT kids who are like the top 5%, the smartest of the batch, are actually, maybe not pursuing the things that I would have thought they might be pursuing. But the second, like the 80th to 85% of like the B students to B plus students in MIT, they're doing wild things because I think that they have the perfect balance of EQ and IQ.
How do you define wild things?
Well, my definition of wild things
is more impactful, or do you think it's more, I mean, how would you define it?
Well, in the technology space, what I really think is groundbreaking, right? Like at the forefront of technology. For example, one of my friends, Tariq Mansoor, he lived right next to me. He's founded a startup, $1 billion valuation called Kalshi, Lebanese background. He's really changing like the way that you look at betting and FX. He's created a new product in the, in the US. Like he's really at the front, what I like define as wild is groundbreaking technology that is
So,
really changing the game.
A lot more risk, a lot more exploration, and a lot more. The top 5 percentile would probably just go and work somewhere, while the more street smart ones would actually end up taking a lot more risks, would you say? दुनिया भर में टेक्नोलॉजी बहुत इवॉल्व कर चुकी है. अब आप घर बैठे एक मोबाइल फ़ोन से पूरी दुनिया में किसी किस्म की भी डिफरेंट एसेट्स, स्टॉक्स या इवन क्रिप्टो करेंसीज ख़रीद सकते हैं. जहाँ पर ये टेक्नोलॉजिकल एवोल्यूशन आए वहाँ पे भी अनफॉर्चुनेटली हालात ऐसे हैं कि इकॉनमी एक ऐसी जगह पर पहुँची हुई है कि बड़े आजकल बुरे हालात हैं. इन्फ्लेशन बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ रही है, सेविंग्स हमारी डिप्लीट हो रही हैं. ज़्यादातर लोग इन्वेस्टमेंट्स करते ही नहीं हैं, और जो करते भी हैं वो 90% लॉसेज अनफॉर्चुनेटली बनाते हैं. इसी प्रॉब्लम को सॉल्व कर रहा है Sarmaaya.pk, जो कि अपने फाइनेंशियल ट्रेडिंग प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे ट्रेनिंग्स भी ऑफर करता है और डेटा भी ऑफर करता है, जिससे आप पूरी दुनिया की मार्केट्स, खासकर पाकिस्तानी मार्केट्स को बआसानी देख सकते हैं. अगर आप लोग अपनी इन्वेस्टमेंट्स और ट्रेडिंग में स्ट्रगल कर रहे हैं तो आई वुड डेफिनेटली अर्ज यू टू चेक आउट Sarmaaya Financials प्लेटफॉर्म. इट्स अ रिमार्केबल प्लेस जहाँ पर आपको बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग रिपोर्ट्स के थ्रू डेटा भी मिलता है, इन्वेस्टमेंट की एडवाइस भी मिलती है, और ख़ासकर उनकी ट्रेनिंग्स जहाँ पर उनके एक्सपर्ट्स जो हैं वो आपको क्रिप्टो और स्टॉक मार्केट और कमोडिटीज़ और एसेट्स के अंदर ट्रेड करके पैसे कमाना सिखाते हैं. सो चेक आउट द प्लेटफॉर्म एंड चेक आउट देयर ट्रेनिंग्स. नाउ बैक टू द पॉडकास्ट.
I think building $1 billion company requires a certain level of like on ground, like human EQ. And I think the geniuses, which is unfortunate, but if you pair it, maybe a genius founder, like one with like the top 5% with, and that's a killer combo. That's the two complementary skills, I could say.
Makes sense. How were the 4 years there though? I mean, and I'll start with you landing there. You're landing at MIT.
Yeah.
There must be a massive imposter syndrome there.
Yeah, for sure.
So how was that? I mean, once you're in.
So I think one thing people don't realize is that MIT is a curved school. So
what does that mean?
So the grading is curved. So what that means is, and versus maybe other IVs are not, I won't name them, but they're not curved. So what that means is, even if you score an 85% out of 100 in your class, if everybody has scored a 95, right, you're a C student. Even though you know 85% of the information, right? Like that's how some of the courses are curved. And so because of that, it's a very tough school, because obviously you have a lot of people from all over the world who are better at calculus than me, or, at other things, than me. And so it was tough that way. But yeah, I still graduated. I was class, you could say class president, so class vice president. So it must have done something right. But, yeah.
Were there a lot of Pakistanis there?
There was, in my batch, 4 Pakistanis, 4 or 5. But in the total PaxMed or Pakistani organization, I think had like 20, 30.
Right. Yeah. Was the community integrated?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, you hadn't lived in Pakistan, but was that identity always there, when you were meeting people, or?
Yeah, I was president of the Pakistani Society for a year as well. And I've always felt, maybe because of my parents, that like my parents used to make me come back to Pakistan, make me, meet my Pakistani relatives and like work on the ground here in our charity to make sure that, I have a strong affiliation to my background. Tell
me about the charity. What does that do?
Sure. So the charity is called Progressive Education Network, and it has been educating children for, the last decade in Pakistan. I think the current number is 700,000 students in the public sector that we just pay that, we along with other very notable donors pay the fee for the child for free. And but it's mostly in the secondary education sector, so primary, secondary.
Interesting. And you worked with the charity as well?
We worked there since I was a kid, as far back as I remember. And I think that's, from a large extent, that's genuinely what shaped my passion for this sector, because I saw charity is great, but it's not sustainable, right? Like, it's not going to change the game for Pakistan. It's not going to change the game for the education sector, because you have to go back and tell your donors, mujhe aur paise de dein, hum nahi karna. And the fact that it's not sustainable is what used to frustrate me. Yeah.
Interesting. MIT में आपका major क्या था?
I majored in business.
Majored in business.
Sloan.
Tell me about like what sort of courses were there? What did the academic side of things, what did it look like for 4 years?
In terms of the courses at MIT, what was the most interesting? Yes, I think the John Cox course was great. He told me the Scholes model, options model, taught me options.
What are those?
So options is either put and call trading, right? It's a trading mechanism. I don't know how to dumb it down, but like it's a way to ensure that your losses are preserved in a put or call. Or I learned butterfly schemes, which basically tells you how you should put a put and call together to ensure that you can put in a trade, but make sure your losses are covered to a certain degree.
Interesting.
So I found that very interesting because I think the traditional way of, for example, thinking about trading is you put your money in, and if the money goes down, your losses are you're going to lose money. But no, you can put your money in and say, this is how much. After a certain point, I don't want to lose anymore. And that was interesting to me.
So you can mitigate your risk at all points.
Mitigating your risk, and like opening my eyes up to this world that I hadn't seen was interesting.
And so you graduated in 2016?
Yeah.
What did you do straight up after that?
I started working at Goldman Sachs. Actually, I graduated in like June, and then the next day I remember I was flying to London to start my job, and my family was not too happy about that. And
that job was in London?
Yeah, it was in London. I wanted to be closer to Saudi.
Right.
And so I was on the desk that I was on was the fixed income desk at Goldman.
Okay.
And
what does that entail?
So what that entailed was that I used to work with the tech companies in the UK. So like Apple, Google, Facebook, their treasury departments, and be like, okay, this is how much cash Apple has. Or like Facebook or whatever. I can't, by the way, these clients are obviously not the actual clients of Goldman.
Right.
I'm not naming the clients of Goldman. And just say, okay, this is how much money you have. You should invest it in certain fixed income products. But I think what was interesting about my time there is I really learned about credit. So, and that's basically what EduFi does now. I mean, the credit space is really understood. How does the risk change for longer credit, shorter credit? How does tenure affect credit? And what are the different types of fixed income products that you can make? And what is the corporate appetite for that? So would Apple invest in ABCP paper? Would they invest in commercial paper? Would they what are the type of fixed income products that they would genuinely feel safe in? Why do they feel safe in that? So I think that was really eye-opening to me, and I was able to learn a lot about the credit space in a short amount of time. And what I loved about Goldman is that it had the same amount of rigor that MIT had in terms of its time. And I thrive when it's a very high-paced environment.
Right, and you were there for 3 years?
Yeah.
Why did you leave?
I got an offer from Ventura Capital, which is a late-stage tech fund. It's based out of London. Mm-hmm. They focus on FinTech, and I was put on the FinTech deals that focus on the credit side because of my background in credit. And so that was super fun as well. I worked on Paytm in India and helped raise $50 million as part of that.
How aggressive is when you're working at such a firm, how aggressively are they looking at in terms of numbers, in terms of, we hear a lot of VCs throwing money over the last few years. In your experience, how much of a due diligence did they do? What was the process like? When identifying what sort of a company to invest in, what sort of a startup to invest in, and particularly when it comes to emerging markets, where the dynamics more often than not can be fairly different compared to what's historically been happening in the West.
Sure. So I'll answer your first question first. Money is not flowing around like it used to, right? Mm-hmm.
Has that changed very recently?
Yeah, of course, with the tech crash, right? I think we're both aware of the tech crash. Let's just park that tech crash aside. I think yes, in the early stages, was there a lot of FOMO? Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a FOMO trade. I think it's also VC. The thing is, but I don't actually think that that's the wrong way to invest. That's what I think my opinion is. Let me just bear with me for 1 second, because when you're an early stage startup, you're investing in you are investing in the founder because the idea or the initial product pivots so many times. Right? So if you're going in, investors cannot say at an early stage, I'm investing in like, the big vape or like not big vape, or I'm investing in Relics or whatever product they've made, because that product's going to change its shape.
Right.
So you're investing in the tenacity of the founder, the desire of the founder, and like the capability of the founder, whether they can see through some form of that vision. So I don't think that's wrong. In the later stages, though, when you're going to growth, due diligence becomes very important. I worked in Ventura, was a Series C to Series D fund.
Right.
Majority of their deals were in that stage, and the due diligence was there. Right? Like we used to spend at least at Ventura, we used to spend a lot of time looking at the financial statements of the business. What is their path? And at that time when I was there, the question of what is the path to profitability was coming into question. Before the tech space, we saw the Ubers of the world where you could have losses for ages and no one would even ask, when is the CAC going to go down, customer acquisition cost going to go down, and when is the path to profitability there? But when I was at Ventura, that question was that we had started asking that question, and we did want to see some sort of either exit or some path to profitability, especially in emerging markets. That question does play a role. In SF, maybe not so much because the capital is there, right? But in Pakistan, when you're building a company, you do need to think about, like, if, for example, right now we're in a tough time, like, can my business sustain itself? Can it become profitable?
Right. For a lot of, when you're looking at emerging markets, Pakistan in 2021, 2022, I was having a lot of conversations. The sentiment was very different. There was a lot of free dollar cash available. Pump हुई भी थी market COVID के बाद से. और बस ये था कि यार where's the next success story, और अब तो जी we're just waiting on the day कि पहला यूनिकॉर्न आएगा और उसके बाद जी लाइन लगेगी. I've been a long-term cynic of startup fundraising in Pakistan, क्योंकि एक तो वो मेडल्स बड़े गलत हो गए. हमने उसको जो है ना बस कॉन्स्टेंटली कर दिया यार, उन्होंने फंडिंग कर ली, ₹1.5 का, और कुछ नहीं पता कि कर क्या रहे हैं पीछे, कोर प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग क्या है, बस who has the biggest fundraising round. But more importantly, when I look at other countries like India or Indonesia, जिसकी मिसाल दी जाती है, right, कि look at these countries, they were able to do it. These countries had this, they really first focused on hard industries, then soft industries, then services. And when you look at their overall economies, they're doing, India is doing $150 billion worth of exports just in IT alone. And it's a lot of that dollar coming in and then creating a middle class, जिस middle class के ऊपर आप एक sort of layer बनाते हैं startups की, right? So when I look at Pakistan, which is draining $20-25 billion a year, suddenly it makes you feel like a pump and dump को 2 मिनट साइड पे रख के, does the graph make sense, at least in the short term?
No, I think that's a very, very valid question. And I think that goes back to my point about, one, you need to have a path to profitability, and second is true value creation.
Right.
And that's why I focused on EduFi, because I believe in making sure that technology is used to solve real problems, okay? If you're solving a real problem, the money will come, and the money will flow. Forget about the money flowing. This is how I think. Forget about the money flowing, it will come. If you are making or putting technology to solve a problem that doesn't exist, that is the only time your startup will fail. And this is, all other problems you can account for. Okay, maybe your UX is not correct. You haven't designed that correctly. Go back to the UX team, fix it, and then you will be able to capture the customer demand. Maybe your product is not making sense. Maybe they want a longer tenure, or maybe it's in a sector that doesn't make sense. But the one problem that you cannot solve for is like there being no demand for your product. You can't create a demand, right? So that's why I believe in emerging economies where you're capital constrained, technology should be used on real problems. So I'm just going to focus on EduFi for a quick second.
Right.
Like EduFi is short for education finance. We're solving the education problem in Pakistan. At least for me, when I was in London, I was thinking, okay, I want to go back to help my country in Pakistan. What are the 2 big problems that I see or that I personally am passionate about? One was people do not have access to education, and until we increase the literacy rate of Pakistan, nothing's going to happen.
Right.
The second is people don't have money. Right. We're a poor country.
Right.
If you put these 2 problems together, what do you get? Student loans.
Right.
लोगों को पैसे दें कि वो पढ़ सकें.
Right.
Like this is a real problem, right? And I think that's where true value creation comes, when you're generating or using technology to create value for a problem that genuinely exists. And if you're doing that, I do believe that capital should flow because the numbers will flow. Right? Demand means numbers. Numbers mean profitability or real growth. And when you have real growth and real profitability, investors are not going to leave an opportunity on the table.
Makes sense.
So
Look,
sorry to interrupt you. This is the problem with like headlines. Like I've been in business since 2 years, not a single headline. We've worked very quietly on focusing on real value creation. This is the first podcast that I'm doing. I'm actually not a fan of, I'm not too good. No, I'm not too great at marketing myself, but my point is that I think everyone, like you said, is focused on the headlines. 6 million raised doesn't matter if it's all gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Look, I'll tell you, I'll be very honest. One of the reasons why, I had a conversation with Faisal. He mentioned 5 startups that he's, or his VC has, invested in. You were the top of my list and I'll tell you why. My thought process kis tarah chal raha hai. The way that I see it, I see aging population in Europe. I see aging population in Japan. I see polarization rising. So first thought ये आती है aging population है, productivity increase करनी है, migration होगी. Polarization आती है, anti-immigration sentiment आता है, तो suddenly आप कहते हो कि अच्छा productivity चाहिए, पर बंदों को relocate आप उतना en mass नहीं कर सकते. साथ in the age of AI आपको ये realization होती है कि अच्छा digital के ऊपर बहुत सारे काम हो सकते हैं. So now these markets are going to be looking at let's say the global south for a lot of the productivity done online. जैसे मेरी थॉट ये आती है कि अच्छा यार पाकिस्तान को इस वक्त डॉलर का क्राइसिस है, पाकिस्तान हार्ड इंडस्ट्रीज इस वक्त नहीं कर सकता, इट टेक्स टाइम, इट टेक्स लॉट ऑफ मनी. व्हाट वी कैन डू इज़ कि हमारी 50 लाख बच्चे जो हैं हर साल 18 साल की उम्र में पहुँचते हैं. somehow if we are able to educate them, तो we can empower them to eventually work for let's say Europe or Japan or other countries in the world and get the dollar in. But then हमारा बच्चा तो educate ही नहीं हो रहा, right? So जब मैंने आपका सुना ना, तो you're part of the only probably very small segment of startups, क्योंकि मैं अब startups को इस तरह नहीं देखता कि startup है value creation है. करीम did value creation. करीम is doing, apart from the fact कि करीम ने पाकिस्तान में headcount उठाया ताकि मेरी valuation ऊपर चली जाए. पाकिस्तान is a loss market. पाकिस्तान के margins terrible हैं और करीम का पाकिस्तान is a pain in the neck for करीम, जो पाकिस्तान की सबसे बड़ी success story है. कंजम्पशन ड्रिवन जितना भी पाकिस्तान में आप जितना भी उसको ऑप्टिमाइज़ कर लें, मेरे हिसाब से वो शॉर्ट टर्म में नहीं चलेगा. The only startup that I personally find value in is one that inherently is part of the funnel that increase bottom line dollar for Pakistan. Education actually is one that increases the bottom line dollar, because if you allow for an X amount of people to be educated and get connected to real economy that they can start to earn from, that's a startup जो कि growth में जो नज़र आती है. And that's one of the reasons why. So I think you're on the right track of problem solving. I want to understand a little bit about, within this context, what exactly are you guys doing at this point in time? You've been, working for 2 years. Yeah. You're live right now? Yes. Okay. Tell me about what's the model? How does it work? Sure. So just to answer, just on your point, just real quickly, well, the gap that I'm trying to target is that if you look at the middle class population, right, they'll do high school. Right. Private sector mein agar aap dekhe, $17 billion market, US dollar, they're doing education. But then there's a gap, there's a drop. Right. They don't go to higher education. This drop is what EduFi is trying to increase, right? We're trying to increase the literacy rates by injecting capital here. बट आपने पढ़ना है, आपने कॉलेज जाना है, एडुफाई की ऐप डाउनलोड करो, आपको सब्सिडाइज लोन मिल जाएगा. आप महीने में मंथली इंस्टॉलमेंट्स पे करो, वी विल इंश्योर कि आप कॉलेज पढ़ सकते हैं. That's what we're trying to do. And are there specific colleges that are right now where, can anyone do this, or are there specific colleges that जिनके students के पास अभी ये opportunity है? So I have poached probably. So in Pakistan, there's around 77 medical colleges. I'm focusing on medical colleges. We have other colleges on our board as well. I poached a lot of them. And right now we have around 20 colleges in 2 years, which is, we have around 200,000 students who are, in our, signed up technically with us. But if a child, what we do in our UX design as well, if a child applies for a loan from a specific college who is not on our portal,
we do make an active effort when if we see a large demand कि इस college में demand चाहिए, लोगों ने students ने पाकिस्तान ने के बच्चों ने इस college में जाके पढ़ना है, we do approach that college and we're like ये ले list, ये भाई लिस्ट है कि ये बच्चा आपके स्कूल में पढ़ना चाहते हैं, पैसे नहीं है, हम पैसे दे दें कि आप हमारे साथ साइन कर लें.
Right.
So we do reverse engineer the demand as well.
Right.
But you have to remember, lending business, the problem is not on the demand side. It's not a demand deficient business.
Yeah, of course.
It's a supply side deficient business, right? We've just raised $6 million US. So inshallah, that problem supply side is solved. So
what are you going to use that money for?
We've been focusing on the tech build, so now we're going to be focusing on growth and marketing. So now after 2 years, we're just going to start actively marketing, getting the word out, which brings me to podcasts like this,
right.
Making people understand our product and this great product that we have for the Pakistani population, and get them to use it. Really.
How do you ensure the students don't default on this? Like, what's the ratio of students who don't end up paying, or for one reason or the other, default on their payments?
So I think it's a very interesting gap, right? So if you study the data from colleges, you'll realize, so we did a survey in, across the 200,000 students that we have. Around 30-35% said that they need some sort of credit facility. Or if there was a credit product available, they would use it. मतलब कि अगर हम आपको लोन देंगे क्या आप लेंगे? उन्होंने कहा हाँ हम लेंगे. But then you ask them, आप अपने फी पे करते हैं? हाँ हम करते हैं. But they still need it because you don't know how these people are, मतलब कि पैसे वो किस तरह पीछे से जमा करके अपनी फी अदा कर रहे हैं. Right? So they are capital constrained, but they are not defaulters. And that is what makes our product beautiful, or this space beautiful, because they're not going to default on this payment. Education is a priority payment for many households in Pakistan. People will default on their घर के loan पर default कर देंगे, या mortgages market तो है नहीं Pakistan में, but I'm just saying if there was, car, but parent will educate their child. Medical college के बच्चे की fee अदा होएगी.
But वही वाला मसला है ना कि medical college is the top of the pyramid, to be very honest, in Pakistan. The real impact is not going to be medical colleges. The real impact is going to be जब D.I. Khan Institute of Technology का बच्चा जो कि जिसका कोई data available नहीं है, जो कि बिल्कुल peripheries में है, और उसको opportunity, that's truly your middle class or sometimes even lower middle class, जिसके फीस भी कुछ ज़्यादा नहीं है. मतलब अगर मैं कहता हूँ कि मेडिकल कॉलेज जिसकी 25 लाख रुपए का मैं लोन ले रहा हूँ, वो शायद 2-2.5 लाख रुपए का लोन, 250,000 रुपीज़ का लोन होगा. बट वहाँ पर क्वेश्चन आता है, देयर आर लॉट ऑफ कंपनीज दैट डू एंड अप फोकसिंग ऑन द टॉप 3% की इकोनॉमी. एंड पाकिस्तान में ये बहुत बड़ा मसला है कि वी हैव अ टॉप 3% की इकोनॉमी जिसके अंदर हम सारी सर्विसेज बनाते हैं, ये करते हैं, वो करते हैं, बट वी डोंट हैव अ बूमिंग मिडिल क्लास, क्योंकि उनके साथ इट गेट्स डर्टियर देयर, राइट, एंड इट गेट्स मोर कॉम्प्लिकेटेड. It's easy to do this with LUMS or FAST or medical colleges and so on. How do you ensure कि for example मैं mass market universities में जा सकूँ और मैं उनको ये facility provide करूँ? I mean, I'm sure there must be some data point, right? Maybe first year पे ना हो, अगर second year के ऊपर मैं कह सकता हूँ कि यार कोई cap है GPA का, degree ka, what are the mechanisms that you use to compel the student to not default? Sure.
So we have EduFi is also one of our shareholders. EduFi, I don't know if you're aware.
I don't know what.
So EduFi is one of Pakistan's leading credit scoring startups. So they raised $7 million. They were just on Forbes as well just the other day. It's led by Salman Akhtar, who is the CEO of TechLogics. So they're our partners. So our credit scoring side is, that's what we've been focusing on for 2 years. This is a risky game. Lending in Pakistan with interest rates are God knows what, is probably one of the most scary things you can do. But
it's also the holy grail as well, right? Look, at least credit scoring is the holy grail.
Credit scoring, and I genuinely do believe that credit scoring does work in countries like Pakistan if you do it right. What we focused on, and that's where my background a little bit has helped as well, is focusing on the consumer's ability to pay. And what our thesis is driven by is that if we think if the person is able to pay or he has the ability to pay, he will pay, right, for a child's education. And when we look at the ability to pay, we're doing, we've narrowed it down to doing algorithms on the bank statements itself, like true algorithms. So, and to answer your question, on the education side, we have an education sector as well. So we look at, for example, what are the dropout rates of a college, right? So there's obvious hypothesis like, okay, if the college is not that great, because there's a medical colleges ki rankings bhi hoti hai, normal colleges ki bhi rankings hoti hai, so dropout rates will be higher. But we've also taken account of, people move laterally from colleges which are not that great to better colleges, right? So you have to account for that. You have to account for GPA, which we do account for. We account for degree hardness. So what that means is that if the degree is super hard, then the dropout rates are predicted to be higher as well. And that's where our technology comes in, because our technology systems are plugged into these colleges. We're getting this data from real time from the students. The students are picking the courses. We know which courses are the popular ones. We know what their scores are for them. We are one of the startups which are genuinely using technology to actually impact real, tangible decisions in the business and how to actually lend out.
Right. In terms of, while you are focused on the technology side of things, ये जो आपका कंज्यूमर है वो जब आपके पास एक दफ़ा आ गया और उसका एक क्रेडिट स्कोर सिस्टम आ गया और उसने इंश्योर किया कि वो आपको रिटर्न्स दे रहा है, माई अंडरस्टैंडिंग इज़ कि यू आर लिटरली द ऑन बॉर्डर फॉर क्रेडिट फॉर अ लार्ज नंबर ऑफ कंज्यूमर्स. एंड सो टू स्टिक टू जस्ट एजुकेशन would be losing out on the value जो कि आपके पास, जब आपके पास वो बंदा आ गया, वो उसने 4 साल आपसे लोन लेके वो फिगर आउट किया, वो ग्रेजुएट होकर बाहर चला गया, तो there is a range of products now that you can potentially offer them because you have a lot of data that a lot of other people don't. And so that person can be literally a lifelong consumer for a lot of a wide range of services.
100%.
आपने कभी सोचा है कि once they're out, what's next for them?
Of course, that's why we're focusing on the student, right? So that's why we're focusing on the student, so we can they have a long lifeline ahead of them, and we want to ensure that we capture all of the value across all of their needs, right? SNPL, which is Study Now, Pay Later, is one of our first products. We have a number of products in the pipeline, but I also don't want to dive into, the number one mistakes that early stage startups do, which is doing everything too fast. I want to focus on what we're doing. I want to be the best in the business in what we're doing, execute that, build a really great loan portfolio, build a consumer base, which literally is sitting in the lounge in Pakistan. वो अपने दोस्त को बता रहे होंगे, भाई हमने तो अपनी education EduFi से कराई है. ये product देखा है. Like, your consumer should be your marketer. Those are my KPIs right now, right? Yes, when I'm doing that successfully, the market will determine my next product. I believe in looking at जो demand है market से, उस पे products build करो. अपने PowerPoint, अपने you make a pitch deck. इसके PowerPoint में लिखते हैं कि हम ये remittance का, like everyone loves putting this remittance thing in there. Remittance डाल दें, ये डाल दें. Okay, but like how? Like, the how is a big part, or the 30 million uncredited population, or there's big key numbers which don't really mean anything. And yes, you have a lot of data. We will build more products, but I believe in let's just do our product and do it to the best of our abilities, and then we can launch more products as and when come. We have a student credit card in the line. Obviously, that's our natural next product. We have a teacher salary advance product. We have a number of really exciting products. If there's demand in the market, we will spend the resources to do that.
What's the vision here, though? I mean, what's in terms of, अगर मैं numbers की बात करूँ, अगर मैं growth की बात करूँ, मैं scale की बात करूँ, you mentioned 20 medical schools, and 200,000 active users, or 200,000 onboarded users at least. But what's the potential, and what are you looking to target over the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure. So the larger vision for EduFi is to be Pakistan's first student-led, digital fintech, right? How that looks like, or what products we end up launching, time will tell. Even if we capture our first primary market, it's like I mentioned, it's a $30 billion market. We can become a unicorn or a $1 billion company, even if we just execute the space to the dot, right? Yeah. But
you don't have any, you're not ready to share any numbers in terms of what your targets are.
Of course, at any startup, when I left my job in London, I didn't move back to just, have a quick exit. We do want to become Pakistan's first unicorn. But I think,
doing it one step at a time with strong
I think
foundations.
It should be.
Tell me about moving back to Pakistan. I mean, you've never lived here. What compelled you? It's not an easy place to live in. It's definitely not an easy place to do business. And you moved in 2021 and it all went to shit after that.
Yeah. Best timing ever. Best timing ever. Honestly.
So, I mean, tell me the thought process before making this switch. And your family is still in Saudi?
Yeah, my family is still in Saudi.
What were
my family's kind of all over the place. Some of them are in London, some of them are in Saudi.
What was their feeling when you said, listen, this is what I'm going to do? And personally, what were you thinking when you decided to make this happen?
Well, the real answer is that I was having an existential crisis on what am I doing with my life. I think as we all do when working in private equity in London or wherever. And I'd done a couple of years there now. So I wouldn't say I was, I had reached that age where I was kind of questioning, like, what is the meaning of life? What is my impact in life? Is it just, am I going to live a consumption-based life, or am I going to give back in a tangible way in a space that I feel passionate about? And that really led my decision because, as I mentioned, I worked in a charity when I was a kid. So I did have this frustration on why we can't solve, there is a pressing problem and we need to solve it. And my background kind of fit well with that from, Goldman credit, investor relations. So I wanted to bring that back to my home country,
did you do some sort of a research? Pakistan mein mujhe karna chahiye. You could have gone elsewhere as well, right? You could potentially have been based out of, let's say, Dubai and focused on the Indian market or the Indonesian market, or there are a bunch of countries jahan par comparatively Bengali market for that matter. Why Pakistan?
Well, if you actually study the Indian market, India has the largest student loan fintechs. They have billions, billion-dollar valuations, but millions, of US dollars pumped in for the exact product that I am building in Pakistan.
Interesting. And there's nobody else currently who's worked on something similar in Pakistan?
Yes. When I moved back in October 21, we are the first ones doing study now. So there's a gap in the market. So to answer your question, I moved to Pakistan because obviously I'm from Pakistan descent, but also no one is doing student loans.
Right.
And so that's what triggered my move. And I personally feel like you should work in a space that you feel passionate about. I feel very passionate about this market. And I do believe that the product will work here, and there's a demand here, there's a need here. I'm not going to build a student loan fintech in London, for example. There's probably existing players there. It's a developed market. They have that, that need has been covered. But in Pakistan, there's a need, and that's exactly what tech is supposed to do.
Right.
It's supposed to bridge that gap between a need and...
Makes sense. What was the family's thought on you deciding to...
My mom just started singing the national anthem. She's very proud, she's a proud patriot, patriotic Pakistani. So, and she's brought me up like that. So she was like, I'm so glad you're leaving the West and doing something that, in our home country.
Was she not worried at all about, again, like I said, patriotism on one side, it is a difficult place to be in, and you moved here alone.
Yeah, I lived here alone. I think especially I think society-wise, it's very weird. Why is a girl living alone? I know I got a couple of raised eyebrows. People were like, "Oh, she's probably moving back to get married," and I'm like, could have done that in London. No. I moved back because this is what I feel passionate about, and it's definitely.
Did you have a social circle here? Did you
I do have a couple of friends, but to be honest, this sounds a bit cliche, but when you're working in the office for a large amount of hours, your team does become your friends. My head of product, I've gotten very close to, and my head of development, she's also a female, Amna Kamar. We're a team, we're a family at the office, and I feel like when you're working towards a collective vision, coming home maybe to an empty house, it's long hours, so.
You headquartered yourself
at Gurry Show, so the TechLogix office.
Right.
So TechLogix is based in Gurry Show. So the top floor of TechLogix. TechLogix is one of Pakistan's oldest tech companies, 30 years. So we're in the top floor. So EduFi has the top floor there.
Was coming to Lahore a conscious choice? Why not Karachi or Islamabad?
To be honest, didn't know when I moved back that Karachi is really the hub of the tech space, and Lahore doesn't really have that ecosystem. But to date, I haven't moved to Karachi because my team, my credit team, and the TechLogix kind of back-end support that we have, because we're part of like a bigger entity here, grounds us in Lahore.
Makes sense. How do you see the overall fintech space in Pakistan? Again, context. ट्विटर के ऊपर हर थोड़े से बात तस्वीर आती है पाकिस्तान फिनटेक लैंडस्केप, जिसमें कोई तकरीबन 250-300 डिफरेंट लोगोज लगे हुए होते हैं. From someone who's been in Pakistan for the last 15 years, I've been hearing about the fintech revolution, mobile wallets, yada yada yada, unbacked population. The numbers, the slide decks are phenomenal. The execution, I don't know if it's the execution that has, I wouldn't say failed, but lagged or what. But somehow it hasn't kicked off. Every year, but like next year is when it's going to really kick off. You're in that space. If you were to zoom out a bit and look at, again, the hundreds of wallets and the thousands of micro products out there, why haven't we been able to create the M-Pesas and the Paytms, even though we had a head start? Pakistan, back in the day, with Easy Paisa, was one of the first in the region to essentially get into this space. But, what are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think a large part of that is driven by capital, right? Like, if you're not going to see the capital, you're not going to be able to be aggressive with your growth strategies. It kind of like you're playing the game with a handicap, right? You can't enter the playing field and expect to win the fight when you have one arm behind your back. That's how Pakistan is playing the field, right? India, access to capital, right? Massive capital. And the discussion will go into geopolitical reasons. It'll go into our, politics, so I don't want to really go into that. But yes, I mean, our economy is down. We just got the IMF package. Hopefully that comes up by Q2 2024. But our economy, geopolitical tensions, lack of capital does contribute to it, right? We have amazing founders like Omer, Abi, great. I can name a number of other excellent fintech, friends and colleagues who are just exceptional. And by the way, in the fintech space, people are hitting numbers, right? Maybe
recently started too.
Yes, if you compare us to India and have we hit $1 billion unicorn? Not yet.
But you think we can get there?
Yeah, most definitely. I wouldn't move back if I didn't think that.
What do you think about the technology side though? Because जो आपने बात बोली इंटरेस्टिंग है कि कैपिटल एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता था, बट अगर मैं एक्सपीरियंस में देखूँ ना तो पाकिस्तान में it was also the people who were getting into it early days में. There was a lot of Pakistan में telecom के पास बहुत ज़्यादा पैसा था. They got into fintech. More often than not, they drove fintech the way that they drove telecom, which was basically they were bona fide marketing, glorified marketing companies. They would go to third parties, get their products made, and then market the hell out of it. मुझे उसमें problem ये आया था कि it's in the word, right? If the tech is in the word, then you need to own the tech. Globally, you'd find that, and I do believe, I mean, Umair's been on the show. There have been a couple of founders. The best founders I found were investment bankers more often than not, which also places you at the top. But they had a very core focus on कि we need to own the tech. The tech is the real value here, and then उससे हम सारा कुछ कर सकते हैं. Historically, Pakistan में you'd find a lot of people जिनके लिए ये था कि यार टेक तो बस ठीक है बनवा लेंगे खैर है whatever. हमने तो basically market करके ना consumer को ले आए, हम काम सारा कर देंगे. Which उसका result ये था कि you got sloppy apps. मैं easy पैसे के example देता हूँ. The biggest player in Pakistan. For almost 6 years, मेरा easy पैसा account नहीं खुल रहा था. मैंने कहा क्यों नहीं खुल रहा? सर आपका data नहीं आता. कहा यार मेरी सिम के ऊपर है, आपने मार्केट किया हुआ है कि मैं एक टेक्स्ट भेजूंगा और वो खुल जाएगा. सर हम करते हैं वो हो जाता है. मैंने कहा टिकट खोलें, फिक्स करें उसको. सर हमारे पास तो इनसाइट ही नहीं है. चाहे आई न्यू अ कपल ऑफ फोक्स इनसाइड, आई आस्क्ड देम क्या सीन है. उन्होंने कहा यार वेंडर ने बनाया हुआ है, वी आर लॉक्ड आउट और हम कुछ नहीं कर सकते. दैट आई मीन दैट वाज माइंड नमिंग फॉर मी, राइट? कि the entire concept of a technology company is कि it should be so fast and fluent कि आप डायरेक्टली घुसे अंदर प्रॉब्लम आइडेंटिफाई करें विद इन 6 आवर्स वो हो जाना चाहिए, जो कि शायद बैंक को 10 साल लगें फिगर आउट करने में. बट हमारा वो जो मॉडल था वो ही ब्रोकन था इन द सेंस कि वी ट्राई टू यूज़ द ओल्ड बिजनेस मॉडल एंड सॉर्ट ऑफ पॉलिश इट विद द FinTech वाली पॉलिश. And maybe that was one of the reasons why a lot of the people failed. अब वो जितना सादा पे आ रहे थे, doing a good job. उन्होंने अभी recently Apple Pay वाला product launch किया है. Again, they're owning the tech. Do you think tech is at the heart and core of any startup?
Obviously, I do, right? I definitely think that, but I think tech is a very broad word. You know, some startups I see tech enabled, right? But if you truly want to capitalize on why do we say tech? What do we say? Like, what does it mean? If you truly want to capitalize on the exponential growth, like if you look at any startup deck, right? You see revenue, it'll be like this, and then it'll go like this. Like
right.
It's called the hockey stick curve.
Right.
Why is that? That's because that's when you really reduce the customer acquisition cost and your tech is working to enable scale.
Right.
And reduced cost. That's what traditional businesses don't have, right?
Right.
Traditional businesses are backed by, it might be a standard inventory business or whatever. They will have, increasing costs as you grow. But that's the difference. And if you don't have that tech in place, your CAC will remain high. You'll continue to burn. You will not, if we're in the current state, you won't get capital and then you'll be out of business.
Right.
So yes, if any startup genuinely wants to run, you have to invest in your tech. The second reason you genuinely need to invest in tech is from a competitive standpoint, right? आज को market करके consumer ले लिया, but tech is an app, right? At its core, it can move to the other competitor really fast, and then there's a lag time for tech. It takes a year or like maybe a year and a half to build, like genuine tech, right? Like for example, the system that we've plugged into our college, it's taken us 2 years to build that, right? And then you'll be too late. Competitors might take your consumers. So you really do have to be tech enabled to ensure competitive advantage and to ensure your CAC is low.
Tell me about your tech. आपने बोला again जो consumer facing है वो तो basic है, right? That's just interfacing.
Yeah.
App आ गई कर लिया. Once you're in.
Yeah.
उसमें कुछ ज़्यादा कुछ काम नहीं है. Do you own the credit scores of your consumers?
Yes.
Okay. And
yes.
Is that an evolving credit score?
And we genuinely use machine learning.
Okay.
And that's why we have, credit scoring is one aspect of our tech, right? So credit scoring is one thing. We're doing that. We have our app, that's the other thing. We have our system that is plugged into the colleges to help us get the data for the students, right? And
that includes the academic data and a lot of those things
exactly.
as well.
Our systems, our ERP systems, our campus and cloud software that goes into the colleges and really allows students to choose their courses and pick that. That's the system. And then we also have our liquidity portal, which is basically what the banks or the liquidity providers use to track their loan applications.
Right. And in terms of so you're basically the connector. जो पैसा basically student को loan में जा रहा है, वो basically bank से आ रहा है.
Well, we've raised our own funds. We have a number. Yes, we partner with banks, but we've partnered with other liquidity providers as well. We've also raised our own money.
Interesting.
All of them, all of the liquidity channels, they feed into our liquidity portal, so you can still view the tech.
So, do you think at some point it can open up to end users as well? So, मैं कहता हूँ यार मेरे पास एक पाकिस्तान में कोई काम की product नहीं exist करती जिसमें मैं invest करूँ और मुझे return मिलता रहे. बेशक locked हो कि यार साल का lock है जो भी whatever. Savings account की एक वो बहुत मसला है, sentimental मसला बहुत ज़्यादा है. This seems a lot more tangible और इसकी आप शरिया compliance भी बड़े आराम से निकाल सकते हैं. Do you think an end consumer can invest in a product like this? Yeah, would you always want to, let's say, go to a mutual fund or this or that, जो कि consolidate करें और फिर आपको lump sum ला के दें?
So one idea that I have been exploring or been thinking about in my spare time is anyone who wants to invest in this space can. I'll do a donation scheme, ठीक है? And whatever capital I get, I will use that to reduce the interest rate for the student.
Okay, interesting.
So spread, आपने invest करना, Muzamil invest कर ले, spread that capital so that more students can get the loan at a lower rate.
Okay, but that's a donation scheme. That's not a return to the consumer. Right? So if I, for example, want to...
No, it is, because remember, our loan has interest. It's just subsidized. So the interest that you get, that's a return to the consumer, right? You're saying a consumer would invest, right? And he invests in the company.
But for example, 1 लाख रुपया लगा, ठीक है, 1 लाख रुपया उस पर डिवाइड हुआ फॉर अ स्टूडेंट, लेट्स से रेट चल रहा है 10%, ठीक है, आप 10% के ऊपर 2% डालते हैं, 12% साल का डिवाइड होता है और वो उसके हिसाब से उसकी इंस्टॉलमेंट्स बन जाती हैं, ठीक है. कैपिटल मैं लगा रहा हूँ, आप इनेबल कर रहे हैं, अगर मैं उसमें डाल रहा हूँ तो उसके ऊपर मुझे...
You're getting the interest, right? I'll give the interest to you.
You give, the interest comes back to me. ठीक है, you take a cut on it, obviously, a platform fee, but that does come back to me. Interesting. It's
an idea I've been exploring, but like I said, our first product is very, 100 things. But the goal of this, the only reason I would bring, if we ever bring retail investors onto this space, the only benefit I see for EduFi is that overall sabka, like for all of the students, if I'm giving it at an interest rate of 12 with retail money, because it doesn't have the same kind of cost of capital associated with it,
right,
I'd be able to reduce it from, let's say, whatever interest rate we have, let's just say 20% to 18%, right, because you don't have a cost of capital, if that makes sense.
Matlab wo,
Get it? So then,
right.
So what I'm saying is, now for all of the students, I can give the loan at 18%, and you make 18%, and then for all of them, I can give it at a...
Interesting. Tell me about, again, the conversation we were just having before this was someone who's working on a social impact product. Fascinating, actually. I never thought of it like that. But उनका concept ये था, उनका यार हमारा वो platform है, platform के ऊपर anyone all over the world can donate on specific areas, and it's all traceable, and there's data available and whatnot. मेरे पास multiple times ना people have come, reached out to me, they're like, यार मेरी salary, मेरी fees due है, और ये फ़ोटो कापीज़ हैं, और आप प्लीज़ ये जमा करवा दें, सेमेस्टर की फ़ीस है, ये वो. अच्छा, पहला उसका मसला ये आता है कि यार 1.5-2 लाख रुपया जब कोई आता है कि आपसे कहता है कि 150,000 200,000 रुपीज़ सडनली जमा करवाने हैं, आई डू फील बैड फॉर पीपल एंड आई डोंट वांट टू डू इट, बट वो लिक्विडिटी फ़ौरन तो नहीं अवेलेबल मेरे पास. वो कह रहे हैं जी लास्ट ड्यू डेट है. दूसरा ये कि ट्रेसेबिलिटी और ऑथेंटिसिटी का भी बड़ा क्वेश्चन मार्क आता है. डू यू थिंक यू कुड potentially plug a product where, let's say, consumer आता है, वो कहता है, so think financial aid but broken down into monthly installments. So for example, मैंने एक बच्चे को भेजना है यूनिवर्सिटी, मुझे इससे गर्ज नहीं है कि बच्चे, अब नॉर्मल यूनिवर्सिटीज़ डोंट हैव लाइक डिजिटल प्लेटफॉर्म्स, उनका वही होता है कि दे गिव यू अ फी चलान, यू गो टू अ बैंक, यू नो सबमिट इट. मैं कहता हूँ कि यार मैंने बच्चे को भेजना है, मैं एक सोशल इम्पैक्ट का पार्टनर करता हूँ, मैं कहता हूँ यार बच्चा आप डिफ़ाइन करेंगे, पेमेंट्स ये मैनेज करेंगे, मेरे महीने की 25,000 रुपये या 30,000 35,000 मैं महीने के कटाऊँगा, आप इंश्योर करेंगे, वो इंश्योर करेंगे, बच्चा यूनिवर्सिटी जा रहा है, आप इंश्योर करेंगे, उसकी फ़ीस अकाउंट फॉर हो रही है, बच्चे को 1 रुपये का भी नहीं, और बच्चा फुल फाइनेंशियल एड प्लान पे. सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल आई कैन से मुजम्मिल हसन स्कॉलरशिप, टेक स्कॉलरशिप मैं लॉन्च करता हूँ, and I partner with these set of people and they manage all of that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, you're basically saying like all of these donors would provide like scholarships for the students free of cost.
Yeah, but that's broken down. So it's much easier for me to account for that donation that's happening every month, rather than, you know, एक lump sum start में जाके बच्चे क्या figure out किया या हर semester में मुझे देना पड़ रहा है. I have a platform जिसके बाद मेरे पास उसकी इनसाइट भी आ रही है, मेरे पास उसकी इन्फॉर्मेशन भी आ रही है कि वो बच्चा जा रहा है, सही जा रहा है, बिकॉज यू हैव दैट डेटा, राइट, कि जी उसके ग्रेड सही आ रहे हैं, सिस्टम सही आ रहा है. डू यू थिंक दैट कुड पोटेंशियली बी मीट? और
या ऑफ कोर्स, आई मीन it's just basically you're combining, it's like a Venn diagram between charity and traceability and accountability, and breaking it down into micro pieces in terms of the payments or the donors coming from. Yeah, of course, I think that's very doable. But once again, the charity model is not sustainable. Like you have to still go back to the donors and be like, भाई आप मुझे और पैसे दे दे, like हमने और बच्चों को पढ़ाना है.
Right. Of course, मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि आपकी तो प्रोडक्ट है ना, आपके लिए मैं चैरिटी नहीं हूँ.
Yeah.
Think of it like this. चैरिटी छोड़ें, बच्चा है, बच्चे ने लोन अप्लाई करना है, बच्चे का जो पैसा आ रहा है ना वो एक्चुअली उसके चचा ने पे करना है जो कि अमेरिका में बैठे हैं.
Okay.
ठीक है. So essentially 2 nodes निकल आएंगे आपके लिए product.
Oh, but so you're talking about co-borrowing.
Yes. So the idea is कि जी मैं forget charity. चैरिटी मेरे स्कोप में, आपके स्कोप में, you're just a product, right? So आपके पास जो बच्चा आ रहा है वो आपको महीने के पैसे नहीं दे रहा. मुझे एक सेपरेट पोर्टल चाहिए जिसमें जो बंदा पे कर रहा है उसको सेपरेट इनसाइट हो, जो बंदा एक्चुअली इज द स्टूडेंट वो अलग हो. Does that make sense?
So we do that already.
Okay, how does that work?
So we are co-borrowing.
ठीक है.
So the student can either, if he doesn't, the thing is we look at ability to pay, remember. So students sometimes might not have the ability to pay for the loan. In that case we allow co-borrowers. So either if it's a relative, so chacha ho gaya, theek hai, ya parent ho gaya, and then we assess their income and to see, and it's a co-borrowing mechanism. So the parent and the student, so there's a parent portal on our app and then there's a child portal. So depending on that, and it's synced, so they'll be able to see this for the same loan ki kitni payment pay hogi hai, and if a child earns in 1 month and wants to pay, we also allow that.
Right. And isme agar for example you have that data of students who have gotten into universities, they've applied for this, they may not have the ability to pay, is there a possibility कि वो co-borrower open market में आ जाए? बेसिकली मैं वो लिंकेज ड्रॉ करना चाह रहा हूँ कि मुझे मेरा बड़ा दिल करता है मेरा बड़ा दिल करता है कि यार,
but are we doing it now? No. And I also think that I think from a licensing perspective,
question mark आ सकता है इसके अंदर.
Yeah, because you're basically getting retail, you're building a retail fund. You're going to the retail in its truest form.
Is there a way for you to have the co-borrower as a father? ठीक है. Is there a way for you to connect at least? मैं ये कह रहा हूँ, मेरी प्रॉब्लम स्टेटमेंट समझे. मैं ये कह रहा हूँ यार मैंने स्कॉलरशिप लॉन्च करनी है, बट मेरे पास मैं नहीं इस वक्त खप में मच सकता कि यार मैं पाकिस्तान में कहाँ से ढूंढूंगा सबसे डिजर्विंग बच्चा.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right. So you can actually connect me to the deserving बच्चा जिसके मैं घर वालों से बात कर लूँगा कि भैया आप लोन अप्लाई करो, मैं आपको महीने की पेमेंट्स क्या करूँगा.
Of course. Yeah, we have if scholarships are part of our plan, like that's a simple scholarship program, and we intend on launching that. But I think the bigger, more impactful thing, like I mentioned before, is that ठीक है आपने तो एक बच्चे को आपने कर दिया. But the bigger thing is taking your money and distributing it amongst evenly amongst all students.
Right.
So that the average cost for all students goes down.
Right.
That's what I think is more impactful. You're just thinking, you have the data कि किसको लोन चाहिए और मेरे पास पैसे हमें connect कर दो.
Right. So
but that's not as impactful. Like connectivity is. It's like I said, like education sector में loans देना or like student loans is not a demand efficient business.
Right.
Like it's not like the service that I'll be providing to you by introducing you to somebody who needs a loan, education loan, is not that valuable.
That makes sense. Do you think? Acha, sorry. It's just because I don't know how the financial system works, and obviously you're the expert there. So help me understand. अभी इस वक्त चल रहा है, let's say interest rate चल रहा है 23%, 22% in Pakistan.
22 base rate, yeah.
22 base rate. That basically means कि अगर बैंक जो है वो 1 लाख रुपया किसी को लोन दे रहा है और उस पर वो 24% चार्ज कर रहा है, तो बैंक को 2% मिल रहा है और 22% स्टेट बैंक के पास जा रहा है.
He's making a 2% margin, but no one is doing consumer lending at 24. It's much higher than that.
I'm just
it's like
assuming random numbers.
Banks are giving consumer lending probably at like 30.
Okay, so 30 में से जो बैंक पॉकेट कर रहा है वो 8% है और 22% goes to the state bank. How does that work?
But like there's a margin of, let's pretend 30% consumer lending, but 22 is their cost of capital. They also have a buffer. They have to maintain a delinquent, like a certain ratio within for liquidity reasons. So maybe they make like 4-5% margin.
Okay. अगर फॉर एग्जांपल आप कहते हैं कि यार मैं पैसा उठाता हूँ मुजम्मिल से और मैं मुजम्मिल को कहता हूँ कि यार तुम्हारा, क्योंकि मेरे पास पैसा पड़ा हुआ है और मैं इस वक्त एज अ कंज्यूमर, बैंक में जा नहीं रहा, बड़ी खप है, एज अ कंज्यूमर मेरा पैसा बर्न हो रहा है, ठीक है, मुझे अगर 5% भी मिल रहा है ना तो मैं बहुत खुश हूँ थियोरेटिकली. ठीक है.
Okay.
Theoretically.
But you could but the consumer can just put it on the bank and get 22%. So
I know. मैं एक theory समझना चाह रहा हूँ.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
बैंक का सिस्टम, क्योंकि मुझे समझ नहीं आ रहा बैंक. ठीक है.
As in like you don't trust the bank.
I don't trust the bank. I don't understand the bank.
For some reason you don't want to put it in the bank account. ठीक है.
ठीक है. मैंने बैंक अकाउंट में डाला, मेरे संदूक में पैसा पड़ा है, बर्न हो रहा है.
ठीक है.
मैं अगर आपको देता हूँ 1 लाख रुपया, can you disburse that at 7%?
I need a license for this.
You need a license for
Yes.
this. If you have a license,
Then yes.
irrespective of the central bank rate.
Yeah, because I don't have any cost of capital from. Nobody tells you what rate you need to disperse at.
Okay.
Okay, that's like this is what we decide, right? We're looking at our own expenses. Our expenses 22%. That's our cost of capital, and then you decide what to set it at, right?
Right.
You're coming to me. For get the money from you, मुझे कोई cost of capital नहीं है.
Huh.
It's free capital for me, right?
Right.
So I might have some like processing or whatever charges on that. But yeah, technically speaking, I can give it to you at 7%. 7%.
Okay.
But I need a license.
What sort of a license?
I believe
Lending
it might.
license? Yeah.
No, and not NBFC. I think it would. I think if we create a retail fund, it would be a little bit different. Like
Okay.
all of these retailers, right?
Right now, do you have a license?
Yes.
What sort of a license is that?
NBFC.
And-
Non-banking financial institution.
Okay. Is this an open-ended license? कि certain आप चीजें पूरी करें तो मिल जाएगा या State Bank की certain limits हैं the amount of people who can get it?
So yes, the licenses have gone through a lot of scrutiny as well in the lending space, and you have to be in business for 3 years, and a certain amount of funds raised, capital requirement hai.
Does it regulate the amount of interest you can charge? Like,
Yeah, they
क्योंकि
do.
आजकल वो recently loan shark का और वो सारा कुछ आया था तो उसके बाद.
Yeah, because of the entire media, like about bad apps coming in the space, you've seen a lot of regulations put on like what you can and cannot do. But actually, EduFi was one of the first apps to be certified. There was a new regulation that came out. We were kind of like the market leaders in terms of getting our app approved by eBricks, which is one of the top auditors.
Right.
That our app is actually, complying with all of our front end, because we were doing those things anyways, like taking a selfie, ensuring that the consumer knows the interest rate, consumer knows what the plan is, and et cetera, et cetera.
Makes sense. I'm going to wrap this up.
Yeah, sure.
But मुझे ये बताइएगा कि how do you see the overall startup ecosystem in Pakistan? We've had a dry period of no money coming in, and then suddenly we get announcements of a substantial amount. You guys raised $6 million. पहले तो start में मैंने start में बोला ही नहीं. Congratulations.
Thanks.
But आपको क्या लग रहा है sentiment किस तरफ जा रहा है for a country like Pakistan that has largely been ignored historically? अब finally थोड़ा सा this is positive news. I'm sure it's going to change the sentiment for the next, let's say, 18 months throughout 23 and then 24. How do you see the sentiment for startups in Pakistan?
I think we should zoom out a little bit and just think about the global landscape as well, right? Like, it's not just Pakistan's going through, like, we've seen interest rates globally increase, and you've seen a tech crash happen globally, not just, airlift tag, not just Pakistan. So we're not immune to the global shift.
But in fact, Pakistan was a symptom of actually what was going on there.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, we're not in our own siloed. But I think that, the cycle is as old as ever. Interest rates increase. People put money in the banks. When people start putting it away from the market, and interest rates decrease. When interest rates decrease, money will go out. And it's very primitive, basic economy, like, less standard. So yeah, I do envision that, by Q2 2024, we should see a bounce back. If you look at our, we keep talking about our dollar deficit that Pakistan has. If you compare it to as a percentage of GDP, it's only 7%, right? And if you look at the US GDP, I mean, I'm not comparing us to the US, but like as a percentage, our GDP, it's manageable, right? And there are discussions that are happening, as you may already know. I'm not going to dive too deep into that, about with the UAE and Saudi, about, some of our assets and what can or cannot happen there. So I think that
generally you're positive about
of course,
this sort of reversing and at least on some level finding some stability.
Yeah. For sure. And what EduFi, I'm just putting EduFi in context of this. We are expected to be profitable within the next 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, most VCs might look at that as a red flag and be like, burn more money. But we're good.
Do you think the VCs have changed though, ever since last year?
It depends. I mean, I don't like doing.
Or are there still VCs who are like burn, grow?
Look, I don't want to put a blank statement on all VCs, right? We can't talk about all VCs like that either. I think emerging market VCs do look at things a little bit differently. Like I said, because of lack of access to capital or easy capital. But I think that if you're a first mover, there is this sentiment that you have to capture the market and create your barriers to entry before anybody else does.
Makes
and
sense.
that requires a burn.
Makes sense.
But yeah, we intend on being profitable. So yeah.
Makes sense, Jenny. I hope to see that happen very, very soon. Aleena, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to ask you one last question. I ask all of my guests. You've never really lived in Pakistan, so this is going to be interesting. And you moved very, very recently. You've been around Saudi, the UK, US, and I'm sure you've traveled all across those areas as well. How do you see Pakistan 27 years from now in 2050? If you see Pakistan over the last 2 years as you've experienced and try to extrapolate that without any ifs and buts, कि अगर ये policy हो गई तो कमाल हो जाएगा. And one thing I really want to stay clear of, because that's just thrown around way too much now, कि जी हमारी एक youth population है जो कि कुछ बहुत magic create करेगी. That can go either ways, to be very honest. Yes, that can be a variable, but that's not the only variable. So agar overall holistically, if I were to ask you, what's the vision, how do you see Pakistan? I believe Goldman Sachs की ही एक report थी 2075 की जो बड़ी पाकिस्तान में share भी हुई, जिसमें Pakistan was the 5th largest economy in the world in 2075 with 27,000 per capita GDP, $4 trillion or $5 trillion की economy. Got a lot of people excited, but उनको समझ नहीं आ रही थी because micro के ऊपर तो the world is burning, right? What are your thoughts on Pakistan 27 years from now?
I mean, I think it's a very difficult question to ask. There's so many ifs and buts. But I think fundamentally, I mean, it's difficult to answer this question without saying ifs. But if there's the sentiment of corruption, like, both in a business sense and as us holistically as individuals when we're doing business and work, doesn't change. And I mean, hopefully that does change. And the informal sector comes, we see growth towards the formal sector, because remember, 80% of our economy is in the informal sector, right? We only 20% of the economy is in the formal sector, and tech is one of those sectors that plays in the formal space. So, but look, I think Pakistan, there's money to be made, right? I think there is a large economy. I think that the tech sector can be a very positive driving force to attracting real capital to the country. We have seen Pakistan do that in previous years, where we were at our highs. And I do think that can happen again. We just need some positive success stories. And I mean, our industries, if you look at our top, some of our top industries, their numbers are very large, right? So I do envision that Pakistan does have a bright future. I hope it does have a bright future. And I hope that I can assist or do my part in it by educating as many people as I can, reducing the brain drain, increasing the literacy rate, and injecting capital into the middle class. And I'm trying to do my part to try and assist in Pakistan's growth.
Makes sense. Thank you so much, Aleena, for this insightful conversation. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Muzamil.
And for all of you guys, thank you so much for watching. अगर आपको एपिसोड पसंद आया, दोस्तों के साथ जरूर शेयर करिएगा. YouTube वाले लाइक का बटन दबाएंगे, engagement बढ़ेगी, लोगों तक हमारी कन्वर्सेशन पहुंचेगी. ऑडियो प्लेटफॉर्म वाले सब्सक्राइब बटन दबाएंगे, आने वाले एपिसोड्स की आपको नोटिफिकेशन मिलेगी. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you think about this startup, this model, this product? And if you're a student looking for a student loan, definitely check out the app. I'm not sure कि आपकी यूनिवर्सिटीज़ पे होगी या नहीं होगी, but it's definitely worth a try. And अगर नहीं भी है तो उस पर डालें, and they'll do their due diligence and try to onboard the university and or you as well. We've put the link down in the description. Link please वर्दा add कर दीजिएगा. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. This was Sayyid Muzamil Hassan Zaidi. You were watching Thought Behind Things. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.